Hi guys, so today we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations using factoring. So we have already been factoring lots of problems, and those problems have just been expressions. Remember that they have not had equal signs in them. All we can do is factor them, okay? But now we're going to have equations that have equal signs in them. And our goal is always to have our equation equal to 0. So for example, if I have x squared plus 10x plus 24 equals 0, I'm going to solve this by factoring. So I'm going to factor this side over here, okay, by using my factor pattern. First thing I look for is my greatest common factor. This one's a 1, which means that there's not a greatest common factor between 1, 10, and 24, okay? Then I'm going to look at my variables, x squared, x, and this one does not have an x, so there's nothing I can take out. So I'm going to move straight to my factor pattern, remembering that this is a quadratic equation in standard forms, x squared, x and 0, and my constant, okay, and it's equal to 0. I want it to be equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and factor it. This number times that number gives me my top number. This number right here gives me my bottom number, okay? And then I'm going to try and think of, do I need 2 positives, 2 negatives, or 1 of each? So in this one, I either need 2 positives or 2 negatives to make positive 24. When I add those up, I need to get a positive. So it can't be 2 negatives, it has to be 2 positives. So if I go through my factors, 1 times 24 does not make 10. 2 times 12 does not make 10. 3 times 8 does not make 10. 4 times 6 does make 10. Those are my 2 numbers. Do I have to do the box here? No, I don't, because there's not a number in front of this x squared. So I can go ahead right away and factor this into x plus 4 and x plus 6 is equal to 0, okay? So now, here is the easy thing here. If I have 2 things multiplied by each other, like say I said 6 times x equals 0, what would x have to be? It would have to be 0, because 6 times 0 equals 0, okay? So this is a multiplication problem. It's saying this times that equals 0. So in order to make this be 0, either this piece needs to be 0, because 0 times all that would make 0, or this piece would have to be 0, because 0 times that makes 0, okay? So this is what we call the zero product property. Your job here is just to find out what will make each piece 0. There's going to be 2 answers here, okay? So my 2 answers here are going to be -4 and -6. Where am I getting that from? -4 plus 4 makes 0, and if this piece were 0 and if I multiplied it by that, I would get 0. My other answer comes from this piece. If I plug in a -6, -6 plus 0 also makes 0, and that times that would make 0. So these are my 2 answers. Now here's something else. Do you remember when we learned how to graph, we got y equals x squared, or let's say ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember that was our equation, right? Well, didn't I start out with an x squared plus 10x plus 24? That's this piece is equal to 0. So what am I saying y is here? I'm saying y is 0. So these are actually our x-intercepts. So when you're graphing something and you find your x-intercepts, you also know what your solutions are to that quadratic equation. X-intercepts are the same as our solutions. So right now, if someone said to me, where does this graph hit the x-axis, I would know it was hitting it at -4 and -6. I also know this graph opens up because it has a positive a term here. I also know what my y-intercept is. Remember, my y-intercept is always my c term. So my y-intercept is here, it's 24. I could use all that information also to graph a quick sketch of my graph as well.